just aliens, extraterrestrials. That's really what my space opera was. That was kind of the unique, or what I tried to make a unique twist on when I wrote mine 5 years ago, the Orb series. So I guess character-driven for sure, but also alien-driven in mine.
Actually, a space opera is a huge genre, and it encompasses a whole bunch of stuff. We kind of call it an umbrella genre. And because it is an umbrella genre, it can have aliens, but it doesn't have to have aliens. It can be set in the far future, but it doesn't have to be set in the far future. I think in addition to great characters, and they need to be memorable characters, they need to be, larger than life in some ways, or at least one of them does, you also need a great setting. Because we've never been to space, most of us out here at least. So we want to know what it's going to be like out there. And so your setting has to be strong too. Your world building has to be strong. And I think the most important aspect of space opera, adventure. You need to bring people a sense of wonder and fun. And, it can be dark, but you still want people to come out of it with, wow, I enjoyed that. And I think that's the heart of space opera.
I would pretty much agree with everything that was said. The other thing I would just add is somewhat the scope of the story. If it's the Galactic Empire crumbling, it's probably space opera. If it's a squad of Marines trapped on the moon somewhere, it's probably military science fiction. And the other thing that pushes me is if it's a little bit less, my head hurts a little bit less worrying about the technology, it's probably space opera. If it goes the other way, maybe it's military science fiction. So if it's closer to Starship Troopers, the book, not the movie, I would say military sci-fi. If it's closer to Star Wars than space opera, if everything doesn't have to be quite as explained as seriously. So that would be my definition.
Yeah, same. Big dramatic themes, big scope, lighter on the technical side than some of the others, really focused on character.
All right, thank you. Let's start on this side, because Jay had to follow Chris, and he looked nobody wants to follow Chris Rusch. That's why she's sitting in the center. What movie or TV show inspired you in regards to space opera?
Movie or TV show would probably have to be Star Wars. Just watching that as a young kid, the big pew-pew stuff. I tend to be more on that side of the style I write, of the ships broadsiding each other, which we all know from a hard SF perspective you would never do, but just from the visual of growing up watching those kind of movies, that would be the go-to.
Yeah, I would have to say Star Wars. I think everybody's probably going to say Star Wars, but I was 13 when it came out, so I think I must have been ground zero for their targeting. Also, a lot of Star Trek when I was younger, and I guess you get more formative things are the things that you remember from longer ago when you were younger. Obviously, I've seen a lot of movies since then, but I would say those kinds of things stick with me the most.
I'm the granny on the panel. It's classic Star Trek for me. The one thing we didn't talk about with the definition of space opera, you mentioned it right off the bat, sort of, about the technology thing, but, spaceships that go whoosh, you can do that in space opera, and I like that, and that's classic Star Trek, so I'm still a classic Star Trek girl.
Star Wars for sure, but also, Battlestar Galactica for me, I don't know if you would...
1970s.
The new version, sorry. I was born in '83, but yeah. So the new version, there's some military science fiction in that too, but I just absolutely love the scope of Battlestar Galactica, and so that would probably be my inspiration.
Yeah, I would say for me it was The Next Generation, BSG in college. Ender's Game was the first book that introduced me to sci-fi. And I grew up with Star Wars and everything, but I wasn't as into it as I was with Star Trek. And I don't know if it was the moral philosophy of this show, or if it was just the fact that it was 7 seasons long and you get more invested in characters. But I followed that throughout my entire childhood, and it just, that interest never went away. So I ended up watching Voyager, Deep Space Nine, even Enterprise, which is the one that everyone hates. But it just never went away.
Honor Harrington, David Weber. I really didn't do a lot of Star Wars and Star Trek, and the movies can come on and I can take them or leave, and I don't care, frankly, about that. But for me, it was really all about books. That's what I've been into. So I would have to kind of point back to David Weber and some of his stuff as being the one that caused my mind to explode.
Superb, superb. Let's mix things up a little bit so we don't all get quagmired into having to answer the same question. So let's look at a new author wants to write space opera. What guidance, what advice would you give them, Amy?
Definitely look at what the other people are doing in the genre and see what some of the commonalities are there. Read the classics as well. Go back to Dune and Ender's Game and some of those really well-known works that have stood the test of time. And I think with space opera, as has been mentioned, it's very character-driven. So really focus on the psychology of your character and the emotional journey that they're going to go through. And also make sure your bad guys are really bad and just really up the drama of everything.
Okay. What about you, Nick? What do you think of that one? What advice would you give somebody who wants to get into space opera?
If we're talking from a marketing perspective, maybe I can add to that. Especially if you're publishing on Amazon, a series, and going back to commonalities, like there's certain covers that work really well in the genre. And we have Tom Edwards here, some others that I think having a very catchy cover. But another thing, not so much on the marketing side, but trying to come up with a twist, which is really difficult. It's hard to tell a story now that hasn't been told in some way in the past. So coming up with a very unique idea is where I would start. And then if you're self-publishing on Amazon, definitely KU, making it a series, putting the books out in a fairly rapid release schedule and having a cover that catches the eye would be probably what everyone would recommend up here, I'm guessing. So, but again, unique twist. That's what I always try to do with my stories, is try to find something, at least an angle that hasn't been done before, at least for marketing purposes.
What do you have to say, Jay?
I was just going to say again, from the success at selling a book point of view, not necessarily writing a good story. The other thing I think is people, when they're starting and they don't have a fan base, should really try to focus on something. I hate to use the word like mainstream because they don't mean a non-original story, but I hear people say something, I have this great idea, it's like a sort of comedic, romance, Western-like space opera, and I'm just thinking, you're giving yourself a much smaller chance of finding your audience. And if you want to build a career, my first book was very hardcore, straight military science fiction, and I think that's why it became successful, because I hit a very specific audience, and also at the time an audience that felt underserved by the publishers. I didn't realize any of this then, but looking back, I mean, that's what I credit with that book becoming successful, and I just think that's very important, is to think about, your readers are your customers, and you might have some great idea, you might even write a great story that way, but people have to look at it, like we were talking about the covers, for sure, and the write-up and all of that, but there's 100 things they have to go through to buy it, and if they don't think, the story doesn't catch them, it seems interesting to them, then you're not even going to get a chance with them, so.
So, how many in here, if you don't mind raising your hands, how many in here are writing their first space opera book? Okay, we got a handful of people. So when I started out, I didn't know the market at all. I just wrote something that I grew up reading, which was YA hard sci-fi, something close to Ender's Game, and mixed between that and like Dune or something, and Fallout 3. And because I grew up watching anime and playing video games, and there's a lot of sci-fi in that. Like, for those of you who like Firefly, that was partially inspired by an old anime called Outlaw Star. And there's a lot of inspiration that you can take from what you grew up interested in, the media that you grew up with. It doesn't have to be books, doesn't have to be TV shows, whatever it is. But think back to when you were a kid. Think back to the moment that drew you into this genre. Because we all started somewhere. Like, that's why we're writing this stuff, right? Because we're super passionate about it. We're not writing romance. We're not writing, in some of our cases, military sci-fi. We're not writing anything else. We're doing this, which is a very difficult genre. You have to do a lot of research. You have to, make it interesting and creative in unique ways. And that takes work, but we do it because we love it. And so think back to what got you into this as a kid or a teenager or whatever. whether it was Halo, the video game, or Star Wars, and try to pinpoint that one element that drew you in. And if you can recreate that in your own fiction, you're going to be successful because you're speaking to a new generation of readers. You're speaking to an old generation of readers that grew up with the same media that you had. And so when I put out Renegade Star, I put in a little bit of Firefly. I put in, some Outlaw Star. I put in some Trigun, for those of you who like anime. I put in all kinds of elements from things that I grew up with, and it worked. People liked it. Even the original series that I put out did pretty well. It didn't do Renegade Star numbers, but it did decently. And that's been my philosophy since I started. If Stephen King, if you read On Writing, says, look for your constant reader, right? Your audience. And if you're interested in something, chances are somebody else is interested in it too. It just depends on the size, like how many people are into that. If you're gonna write something really niche that, has a smaller audience, like Jay was saying, you're gonna sell less books. But at the same time, if you can sort of move that over to a slightly broader genre that you're still super passionate about, you'll sell more books. So, writing to market is great and everything, but just make sure that your heart is in it and that you're doing what it is that you want to be doing, and it's inspiring you, and if it's doing that, it'll inspire other people.
Let's look at...
I just wanted to add, one thing I definitely want to clear up, I'm not talking about writing the market and chasing trends so much as just having a clear idea who's out there that's going to be interested in this. I definitely don't think it's a good idea to chase like the latest hot book that sold a whole bunch of copies and try to write a copy of that. I think that's a bad idea.
What I wanted to add is, since I am the granny on the panel, and I did work in traditional publishing and in Hollywood and other places, the one thing I know from my long history in the field is that the people who were the curators of the science fiction and fantasy field thought space opera sucked. They thought Star Trek was awful. They thought Star Wars was terrible. They thought the video games were a waste of time. And those folks are still curating traditional publishing. And so there's not a lot of space opera that's actual space opera that's published that way. In fact, I was once told I was wasting my time for writing space opera. Yeah, right. That's why I've been doing it for a decade or more, just on space opera alone. But the reason I'm telling you this history is because it is my personal opinion that space opera is still a growing subgenre. It is huge, and the demand out there is massive, because think of all the Star Wars fans. Think of all the Star Trek fans. Think of all the gamers who've done you're right, they all have science fiction elements. They all want to read as well as see their movies and everything else, but they've been underserved. So I think just because, everybody who's writing good space opera is doing well, but there's still room for a lot more. And if you write it because you love it, that will actually show in what you do. But don't worry about, how big the market is or anything. I don't think we know how big it is. I think it's going to be huge by the time it's done.
I like that. And while you have the mic, what elements do you look for on a space opera cover?
Oh, I need to have space. Some sign of space. I need to, it depends. I mean, covers change every 5 years or so. The covers start to look old after about 5 years, and so some years it's, they want a lot of people, some years they want ships. Right now I think having women on the cover really helps, tough women with a ship and space. But yeah, it's something that'll grab the reader, that'll look, this is the problem with covers, they have to look just like every other cover but different.
Yeah.
And that's tough to do. But first of all, it has to draw you in. It has to say, "Oh, that's space opera, I want to read it." And then it has to say, "Ooh, that looks like something I've never seen before." So, you guys have been talking about covers off and on all day. It's that kind of thing.
Okay. What do you think, Michael, on a cover for space opera? You've given me all kinds of personal feedback in that regard.
This cover sucked. A couple of things. On that last question, I suggest adding vampires to space. That might work. On the covers themselves, we have been both successful and unsuccessful with our covers. We've spent tons of money and a little bit of money. We've had success both ways, and we've had failures both ways. I do believe that, as Michael Cooper would say, spaceship ass sells a lot. So we've seen that be very successful, and we try to move forward. For me personally, I like brighter colors on my covers. I like to be able to see them and not have a really dark look to the spaceships and the worlds and everything. And so that's just a personal preference based on my age of getting up to where I need, more and more glasses. But just from that, I want something that speaks to me, that speaks different. And I always get annoyed when I see someone come out with a cool cover and go, why didn't I think of that?
What is, you all write series, what is the right length for a space opera series?
I don't think it matters. Mine are pretty short. I know other people that have, like my books are probably 50 to 55,000 words each.
I mean, length of number of books in the series.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on the story, right? Because, I mean, I've got the first arc in mine, 6 books, and the next arc is probably into 12. Michael here has, thank you. Nervous. Michael here has like 21 books and a sequel series and then a billion spinoffs, so I don't think there's really a limit to what your universe can hold if you're creative enough. And Jay, how many is it in Blood in Our Stars? Like 9 books? 10 books now? There you go. So I've seen. I was going to stop at 6, but money. Yeah, money.
Selling.
Actually increasing, so I figure a way to make it. The new storyline ties in. I had planned that series at 6 books, and when I put out the 6th book, it was still as strong as it had been in the beginning. So I came up with a new storyline and just kept it going. I was going to make it like a second series in the same universe. I'm like, no, that's confusing, because no matter what you do, people will be confused about the order of the books in the series. So I just kept going with the series, and I don't know how far I'm going to go, but I'm on 10 and it's still going strong, so I'll probably go to at least 15. So, but
yeah. And at the same time, I mean, like, don't feel like you have to stretch it out, because, I mean, look at Isaac Hook, the guy writes trilogies, that's all he does, and those books sell like crazy, So, like, if you have an idea for a trilogy and you think it'll do well, you want to write it and see how it does, Yeah,
if you let a series go stale and people get tired of it, and then that's definitely time to end it, because that's not helping you. But if you can keep it interesting, I don't think there's a better business model right now, especially for indie authors, than to keep a series going as long as your readers remain interested in it, and you can think of things to keep them interested in it.
Yeah. What I do is I try to every single book have a new arc, not have like, a cutoff at the end that leads into the next book, but have like a self-contained arc in that story, and each one needs to be unique, so that when you get to book 6, book 4 still stands out in your memory, book 2 still stands out in your memory, so that you like a different antagonist, different setting, all these different ideas, always something new that keeps people invested. You don't want to be running on fumes when you get to book 8 or book 9. Like, you want people to keep coming back because they're addicted. They're addicted to the story and the characters and the new places they're going.
So one thing to keep in mind is if you are starting out with a really long series as your first, and this is what I fell victim to. I had a 7-book series that I did as my first. And I learned a lot in the process of writing those 7 books, and I know that 6 and 7 are way better than 1 and 2. But those are the only thing that I had to market, because I had to start people on book 1. So I would recommend, if you're doing your very first series, maybe start out with a trilogy. If you really love that universe, you can then do a book 4, but you can start that as a new arc. It might have the same characters, but you can continue on and have a new entry point to use, and be able to take all of those skills that you learned in your initial books and bring those forward, and then have a new book 1 to market, because the more book 1s you have to market, the more opportunities you have to bring in new readers.
And let me give you a trick that I have used for years, and it's fun for me, and that's all that really matters to me as a writer, is ultimately if I'm having fun, then the readers are having fun. I don't sit down and do the Bible kind of world building that they do in television and all of that other stuff. I know a lot of writers do that too. I don't do it. If I want to know a part of my world, I write a short story or a novella or something to figure it out. I explore it with my characters. So I often have new characters that come in and do that, and then I kind of reverse engineer the Bible from there. But that way I get a story out of it. I keep myself interested. I'm refreshing the series because I'm exploring a part of it that nobody has seen before, because I'm inventing it as I go. And, oh, the readers really love it. And so, I'm all over the map on length, which doesn't matter because I can use the different, I'll talk about this tomorrow morning somewhat, but you can use those for marketing purposes and everything else. But the ultimate core of it is, I'm trying to figure this stuff out too. And so I'm having a blast, and then the readers do.
If you were me, what question would you ask next?
Nicholas Sansbury Smith, what do you think the question should be?
So I think back to when I started, and I'll talk about this Thursday morning about my hybrid publishing journey, but I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was encouraged to self-publish a book that I had written over the course of 6 years. So I wish I would have had a mentor at the time, but really what I did was I took it upon myself to teach myself how to market, and so I guess it's not really a question, but I wish if I could go back in a time machine, I would ask what the best route to publishing is and how to get there. So the answer to that question, I will tell you on Thursday morning.
Yeah.
No, actually there is, I'll talk about this Thursday morning, but there really isn't one path. We all know there's no one path into success in this. So I'll be talking a lot about that. But I think having a mentor really does help. So find someone that can answer questions for you, that you can talk to about marketing, about the story, whether or not you should go traditional publishing or self-publishing. Just have someone that can help you. Hopefully that.
Cool. What do you guys think of audiobooks in space opera? As far as...
They buy lots of them.
Is it a lucrative market? Is it not lucrative in space opera?
It's a very lucrative market. I mean, again, space opera is growing, so it's growing in audiobook too.
Yeah, actually, I've heard rumblings from people at Audible and even Podium that audio sales are expected to surpass ebooks over the next 5 to 10 years. The market is growing that quickly.
Up 20% a year or something like that's obscene.
I mean, in the States, we're always on the go, and it's not like that in other parts of the world, as Amy can attest to. But over here, we get our coffee and we're out the door, we're drinking it in the car, we're eating a donut as we're driving with our knees. We just can't slow down, and a lot of us commute, and they just don't have time to sit and read a book. So it makes sense, right, that in this kind of world, this new world that we've got going on, and plane rides and everything like that, that audiobooks would be exploding. And when you're bringing in people like R.C. Bray and all these amazing audio narrators that can do all these voices and really almost like an audio play, and people are continuing to experiment with it, like Ender's Game, like I mentioned it earlier. Orson Scott Card put out something called Ender's Game Alive, I think it is, it's an actual audio play, totally different from the book, written specifically for an entire cast of actors, and that's on Audible. So I mean, who knows where the future is going to be with just that? But it's interesting because we started out there, right, in the 30s and 40s and 50s when radio was big, and now we're coming right back to it. So. Yeah, I mean, invest in audio. Get a good deal with one of these publishers, or, be like Michael and do it yourself, and have an audiobook coming out every 3 days.
Sorry, I'm trying to ask Nicholas a question without everybody hearing the question.
Michael wants me to talk about my audiobook publisher. I've had, honestly, very humbled by the success I've had in audio, and it really started, let me backtrack. So I started off with a terrible result with my Orb series on Audible. This was 5 years ago. Those books did not do anything at all. So that kind of hurt me moving forward, but I ended up going with Blackstone for my second series. And that series just took off, did extremely well. And then I launched my Helldiver series, which actually I think book 4 came out today, and it's, last I looked, it's number 2 in all of science fiction audiobooks right now. So it's been extremely successful, and part of that is R.C. Bray, but Blackstone is one of there's a couple really awesome publishers like Tantor, Podium, Audible, Blackstone. There's some other ones too, but Blackstone's really kind of unique in the sense that they're able to get my books in places that Audible, for example, might not be able to. Military bases, I'm talking about the hard audio CDs, but also libraries. They're great for libraries. And I'm trying to think of some other places like Storytel. I think that's in Norway. I get European readers through that. So there's a lot of different things that have happened for my audio career to get to where it's at, but there's a lot of different routes you can take. You can do ACX, you can sign with a traditional publisher, but I would say the most important thing that you do is that you find a narrator that fits your book and that has some sort of name recognition. I have a lot of author friends that have had these deals, great deals, but had a no-name narrator, and everyone has to get their start, but that really is difficult because when you self-publish a book, or however you publish a book, you're judged on the story. But when you publish an audiobook, you're judged on the performance and the story. So it's even more difficult in that sense. Now I'm kind of rambling, but...
Well, people buy your audiobooks not just because you wrote them, but because so-and-so narrates them. So the narrators have fans, and you have fans, and if you're lucky, it's a perfect marriage. And the other really cool thing about audiobooks, and I have a hunch you have a lot more to add about this, but what I have found from my readers, which kind of astonishes me, is that they will buy the book in paper, they will buy the book in ebook, and they will buy the audiobook so that they can continue reading all the way along. They buy all the different formats. And what I've found with my readers is when I have a new book and I'm saying it's going to come out, they will listen to all the old audiobooks before the new book comes out, which then they buy an ebook so they can read it really fast.
Yeah, so the reason I didn't want to ask this is because names and faces escape me, but we were in New York, and we're at the New York Fair. So this is, one of the big 4, and we're walking around, and Judith and I had a meeting with Blackstone Audio. So we're going to their booth, and imagine, if you will, you're in New York, and these things are huge. And so we're going in there. Now, anytime you go to some of the audio producers at these fairs, they're going to have just the CDs and everything else of whoever that they're promoting, right? Well, Blackstone's booth is huge. And one of these kind of walls, if you will, of godness to this book is Helldiver. Correct? Yeah, Helldivers. And so for me, I'm walking in there and I look over and I go, Nicholas Sansbury Smith, Helldivers. And the thing's 15, 20 feet tall. So that was why I asked him if he would speak about Blackstone, because I've been to that fair and had his stuff been promoted to thousands of people walking through there.
So that was Book Expo. They've had me out each year, and part of the reason they do that is because my Helldiver series is actually a traditionally published deal with Blackstone. They do ebook, hardcover, everything. So that display wasn't just for the audiobook, it was for everything, and they're doing that for a lot of their authors. But Blackstone is, in my opinion, one of the top best audiobook publishers, and they do deals for both just audio, so if you can keep the rights for everything else, or they do deals for everything now as well, which is what I've done with my Helldiver series. So just to clarify, because they don't do any of that stuff just for someone that I think just has an audiobook, for example.
In your main space opera series, your protagonist, your main hero, what's the character trait you like the best of your characters? Just one. Michael.
My main character is Bethany Ann Reynolds, and she takes no shit from no one.
Okay.
Go right down the line.
My main character is Jace Hughes, and he's basically just an anti-hero, and takes shit, cusses a lot. Sound familiar? Yeah, it's basically just a mix between Indiana Jones and Han Solo. So, I mean, Harrison Ford all wrapped into one, I suppose. So, Yeah, I mean, just have fun with your main character. You know, do a little self-insert, have it be the person, you know, like you would want to hang out with. You know, something like that, and have him say a lot of witty things and a lot of sarcasm. People love that stuff.
And humor is key. I think that's something that we should talk a little bit more about, because a lot of the best space opera books, the best-selling space opera books, have a large element of humor into them. I mean, like, Craig Allison's here. I'm sure a lot of us know who Skippy is. Just wanted to give a shout out. So, but for me, my main character is Sophie Winston, Dr. Sophie Winston, and she never gives up. So she's not a humorous character, but her character is driven by the desire to save the human race. So that is what drives her through the full 4-book arc.
Well, I have a couple of space opera series, and I'll talk about the diving series. The character is a woman who is so private, I don't even know her name, but everybody around her calls her boss. I really like that about her. She is in charge, very smart, and extremely courageous. And she prefers to do things alone, but that never happens for her.
Yeah, the character in my most recent series, he's the grandson of a big hero that preceded him, and he's very uncomfortable with that. And I like that. I put that in the character from the beginning because I wanted to give him something. I mean, obviously, you know, he's brave, he's capable, he, you know, kills the bad guys, does everything that almost every character does in that situation. But it's like making a character, you know, an alcoholic or a drug addict or has a problem. He hates the fact that he has all this recognition coming from, you know, his family, and that's, so I kind of like that best about, you know, that's probably my favorite thing.
In my Catechal series, Will Sightman's really the central character in it. He's extremely smart and capable, extremely powerful, but also very emotionally vulnerable and broken, which I think is a big diversion, and maybe why the series hasn't sold as well as some of the ones here, but the people who love the series really love it, and I think showing that other side can be valuable too.
Let's start with Jay. How do you integrate a spaceship into your space opera?
Well, it depends, again, how realistic I'm being in the series. Sometimes I pay a lot more attention to the actual science, and sometimes I pay a little bit less. But I usually try to give it a history. Like in my most recent series, the ship they started with was kind of old, you know, not as good as some of the newer ships. Gives it a little character. That's not an uncommon kind of a trope. But I mean, just try to give it a little character, a little history, and really show it through the characters. You know, like Captain Kirk and the Enterprise, you know, how he was about the ship. That described the ship because it was how it affected the characters around it. So I would say that's how I do it, and any history the ship may have, and then, of course, you build more as you go.
Is it an effective trope? Is it an effective tool within space opera?
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Because everybody said character-driven. So,
well, the spaceships are characters too. I think about like Millennium Falcon or all these ships, Enterprise, all these things we talked about.
Okay.
The ship, we remember the ships as well as the characters. So,
Yeah, that goes back to what I said earlier, that you have to have a really firm setting, and the ship itself has to be a firm setting. And you don't have to, I almost never write from the perspective of like the engineers who know how the ship works, because I don't know how my car works. I just go in there and I turn the key. I mean, I know the basic principles, and that's about it. And so that's how I tend to write my ships too, but they're also very concrete. I know what they smell like. I know what they look like. I know what they sound like inside. I know how big they are. And I think that's essential, because we need to have, the readers need to live in the ships just like the characters do.
Well, I think most of us know there's like two types of space opera, right? There's like the hard sci-fi, like Star Trek, and then there's Star Wars, you know, with the Millennium Falcon versus the Enterprise. And they both have different startup sequences when they're trying to get somewhere. Star Trek takes like forever to get going, because, and we skip to the engine room and we watch, Geordi LaForge boot up, the warp drive, and it takes like 10 minutes, and then versus Han Solo, he's just like, hits the go button and he's gone. Like, hit it, Chewie, let's go. Yeah, whoosh. And but the one overlap in all this is that both ships feel lived in, right? They feel like a home. And you'll see that in every major sci-fi, whether it's Battlestar Galactica, or Firefly. with the Serenity ship and everything. It doesn't matter what it is. It feels lived in. It feels like these people have lived there for a long time. We see them in various parts of the ship, like in The Next Generation, we see them like doing Tai Chi in one room, and then we walk through the rest of the ship with them. In Star Wars, we see Chewie and C-3PO playing chess or whatever that game is. All kinds of stuff. So include little details like that in your stories, and let the ships, like you said, become characters, feel lived in and real, places that you would want to visit and explore if you could.
If I'm not cheating by giving it like an artificial intelligence so that they are a character, then I would suggest looking at it when you're having your ship and defining what is it you want to feel about this ship. What is it as a reader do you want your readers to think about this ship? Is it a troublemaker? Is it amazing? Is it getting them out of stuff? Is it always, are pieces always falling off as they take off? What is it that's occurring here? And embody your story with that character of the ship.
We have 7 minutes left. If anybody would like to ask questions, please line up at the microphones. You have quite an august group of panelists here. Ask away. Dan.
So, for something to be...
Please, closer to the microphone.
For something to be considered space opera, do you need to have a character that has a ship at their command?
Universally, no. I don't know, did you want to actually follow up with that? So let's take a look at this. So if you're in sci-fi, I can go rent a ship. I can go be on a ship. I can go, I don't need to have an ocean liner to get me from Europe to America, but it helps or whatever. So you don't have to have any of these things to be space opera. I mean, we've even talked about it some. Craig's got a series where they kind of have westerns on another planet. And so the question you could almost argue is, like, do you need to have space in space opera or just be somewhere? I think actually you could probably answer this best. Chris, yes?
Yeah, I've got a series that's set on the moon. It's a detective series set on the moon. And, it's in a domed city and everything else. So I consider it space opera. Some people consider it hard science fiction, and I don't know why. So the definitions, as we've been saying all along, are fluid. Do what you like and what you enjoy, because I really think that's the secret to good space opera. It's the secret to good fiction, to be honest with you.
Yeah, would you consider The Fifth Element space opera? Most people would.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't have a spaceship, but he's traveling through space and he's going to different locations. So I think it all comes down to, really just that. Like, are they on the move? Are they visiting places? Is it another planet? Are we at least getting out into space? Is it set on a space station? Like, it doesn't really matter if they have their own ship, I don't think.
All right, next question to set, please.
I have a follow-up question, sort of to something that Amy was talking about. It's about serialization of a series. My partner and I are writing a series. He's already written the first 3 books. I'm going to take the helm on the next 3 books. Mine are set 30 years beyond his books. What if he wants to write a book in between, and I've already labeled my first book, book 4? I know Nick Webb, for example, with his Legacy Fleet, he wrote 3 books and then started a separate series, realized he lost readers, and has now rebranded that separate series as 4, 5, and 6 of the first. So it's a practical question. Do I go ahead and number my book 4? Do I start a separate series, which Nick Webb, I think, would argue against, maybe? What's the panel's wisdom on that?
I've been hearing it both ways. I am now leaning more toward continuing it and having a book 4, and then you would just renumber it if you insert one. But others who have longer series, please answer.
Yeah, this is something that there's not a great answer to, because I don't think there's any way you can account for anything you might want to do. I generally have come over the years to feel that the simpler you can keep it for readers to understand, the better. I mean, I have put books with a list of all my books in the front and the back, and right after the last word of the book, I put, the series will continue with this, coming soon. And I'll get 100 emails from people asking, is there going to be another book in the series? So keep that in your mind. People are, their minds they have other things in their lives. They read the book, they put it down. Every time you put a little bit of burden on somebody to figure something out, you lose some percentage of them. So I would generally go in the order of just keep a series going in a linear way, and then if you decide you want to go back and shove something in the middle, maybe then do a spin-off series. And obviously the spin-off series will have that challenge, but I would not go that route until I had to. I would keep it simple and straightforward and keep the momentum going. This is just from a sales point of view, not from a story plotting point of view, but that's what I would do.
I'm one of these sad, sorry writers who writes out of order. So I can never have anything go chronological. And so, there are times you're just going to rebrand your series. And Amazon makes it tough in one respect. If you put up the next book in the series, they're going to say, book 7 of 7. Even if there is a book 8 that you're writing, it's still going to say book 7 of 7. So don't worry about it, write it, and then figure out what you're going to do. That's my advice.
Okay, let's take the next question. Michael.
All right, thank you all for sharing your experience. My question alludes to kind of what Jay mentioned. Sometimes you focus on the science, sometimes you focus less so on the science. So if you're writing soft sci-fi or soft space opera, what advice would you give to a writer to make the science plausible without hitting some of those reader hot buttons that it seems like readers and reviews, the science is pretty important regardless of the softness or the hardness of the sci-fi?
Don't get specific, That's really all it comes down to. Like, I like hard sci-fi, but the series that I'm doing now sort of calls for a softer approach. So I'll have high concepts in there, but at the same time, your readers don't really want to dig through the trenches of DNA sequencing, to get to the point. They just want a very brief sort of glimpse into what you're talking about so they can move on. So I think the story really makes that decision for you, and you're saying you're writing something soft, just don't go into detail, give enough to where it's plausible, and then back away and move on to the next scene, get into the action, focus on that.
Just one real quick, just make sure that you market it properly so people understand what they're buying. I put a reader note in the front of Orbs that said this is not hard science fiction. If that's what you're looking for, this might not be the right book for you. That's one way to kind of avoid those types of readers. I still get negative reviews on the science, which is absolutely terrible in that series. And that's why I've focused more on the science in my next books. But the other thing is just make sure that you do keep the basic stuff. Make sure that you get the basic stuff right. So if you're talking about a virus or something, make sure you know what a virus is versus what bacteria is or something like that. You know what I mean? It's just make sure you get the very basic stuff right, because that is what you're going to get hammered on the most. And if you market the book properly and people know what they're buying, then you will avoid a lot of those problems. You still will get people that will pick up the book not knowing what they're buying. I mean, I still get reviews saying they're reviewing in a totally different product. So you can't avoid some of that stuff, but you can make it a little bit easier for people.
Or add vampires, because if they believe vampires, they'll believe anything.
All right, thank you. We have run out of time. There's no more time. Sorry, Tom, we can't get another question. I appreciate our panelists. Thank you very much for joining us today. Talk about space opera. We have